Well, hello there, and I do hope you're all well. Now, yesterday I did say that I had a treat for you. Well, here it is. On Sunday evening, Nick Abbott opened his more serious show with two guests from opposite views, you could say. One was Sir Gerard Howarth, who was a former Defence Minister and former Conservative MP and also a member of Leave Means Leave. He was up against Bishop Stephen Lowe, who was the former advisor for the Church of England, and also backed the Remain campaign. And to say it was entertaining, could say it was an understatement. One was dealing in good old facts and evidence, but sounded like someone was about to keel over. The other dealt in fantasy, old meaningless slogans, and nonsense. Enjoy.
Now, to talk about that, Sir Gerard Howarth is on the phone. Sir Gerard is the former Conservative MP and Defence Minister and a former board member of Leave Means Leave. Also, Bishop Stephen Lowe is on the phone, former advisor to the Church of England and former Bishop of Hume in Manchester, who backed the Remain campaign in the EU referendum. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Nick.
Good evening, Nick.
Now, I want a clean fight, no eye gouging, no hitting below the belt. May I call you Gerald and Stephen?
Indeed, yes.
Please do.
Bishop Stephen Lowe, let me come to you first. It's all got a bit too much. Boris Johnson's had his chips, surely.
Well, I think so, though if I were Keir Starmer, I think I'd rather he stayed there, because I think he would be heavily defeated in any general election. But what disturbs me more than anything else, Nick, is that this is now becoming a government that has no moral basis whatsoever. And I find it very difficult to believe in a democracy that you can have a government in power which doesn't actually believe in a fundamental moral basis for the decisions they're taking and the way in which they're governing. And to have a prime minister who seems to be amoral completely is also very disturbing, I think, for a country of our importance and significance.
It's also quite significant, isn't it, the measures that they're trying to push through Parliament at the moment, which does rather underline what your impression is, that they're not... They may not have a moral centre, but they also don't seem to be that interested in democracy.
No, I think that's it. They actually want to skew the system so it keeps them in power. Power is what matters, because power seems to bring privilege, economic benefit for a comparative small number of people, for their friends, and one way or another, the rules don't apply to them, even although they create the rules. And that is not the basis for a democratic government to conduct its business. It's the stuff of dictatorships of Myanmar and so on. It worries me enormously that we're descending into the gutter as far as our political system is concerned in this country.
Sir Gerald Howarth, it is becoming increasingly difficult to defend this government, isn't it?
Well, undoubtedly the government has run into quite serious problems, there's no doubt about that. And the news today that Lord Frost has resigned from the government, I think is particularly bad news. It's bad news for the Prime Minister, but it's also very bad news for the country, because Lord Frost has been a very trenchant negotiator with the European Union, which of course has bent every sinew to punish the United Kingdom for having had the temerity to vote to leave the 1950s defunct construct called the European Union. So that is the first thing. And the second thing is the reasons why Lord Frost has tendered his resignation, which is not just to do with the negotiations with the European Union. And those of us who are Brexiteers will be very alarmed at the reports coming out of Downing Street that the government is apparently going to concede that the European Court of Justice should have some sway over a constituent part of the United Kingdom, namely Northern Ireland. And it is absolutely vital that we get that resolved, and resolved quickly. But the other reasons why he decided, he expressed concern about the direction of travel of the government. He says we need to get a lightly regulated regime, low tax, entrepreneurial economy. And I think he's absolutely right. And a lot of Conservatives are very worried that this government appears to be much more socialist than it is conservative. That is why...
Gerald. I mean, can I just interrupt for a moment? Because I really do find this all very difficult. First of all, Lord Frost at one time was an ardent Remainer. Secondly, the issue at the moment is that he's resigning on the grounds that the government is prepared to take, or might be prepared to take, further steps to protect the people of this country from the Omicron virus, which is quite extraordinary. That there are members of the Conservative Party, probably including you, Gerald, who are prepared to, in the name of liberty, to put at risk the lives of the British population. And these members of the Conservative Party are totally out of touch with where the majority of British people are. Just look at all the opinion polls about the need at the moment to actually tighten the rules in relation to Omicron and actually to make people safer.
Yeah, Sir Gerald, can I interrupt your interruption of his interruption?
I'm not interrupting him. He'd finished.
Can I just...
He interrupted me. I was making a point, but let me address those 2 points.
Okay.
The fact that Lord Frost was once a Remainer, so were a number of people in this country who have now seen the wisdom of the decision of the British people, that is to say, ordinary people, whom clearly the Bishop despises. And secondly, he makes the point that Lord Frost has expressed concern about the government's response to this COVID.
Yeah, on that subject, Sir Gerald.
The first point to make is that Boris Johnson has been singularly, spectacularly successful in the judgment he made to back not one but 5 pharmaceutical companies who were developing vaccines, none of which he knew were going to work, and in fact all 5 have worked. And Britain has had the most successful vaccination programme, the most successful rollout. But as Lord Frost and I and others, 100 members of Parliament, 100 Conservative members of Parliament last week, feel that we are not taking advantage of having inoculated the people. I've got COVID-19 at the moment. I have had not even a temperature. This is not a variant which has...
Gentlemen, can I just ask one question? I mean, the variant, the virus affects different people in different ways, and how it affects you, Sir Gerald, is not necessarily how it might affect the person next door. But isn't it odd that David Frost resigned over supposedly something that has absolutely nothing to do with him, rather than his serial failures to negotiate a good deal for this country with the European Union?
What do you mean serial failure? That's an absurdity. What he did was rescue the appalling deal which Theresa May negotiated. He didn't secure everything because 2 things were left unresolved. First was the Northern Ireland Protocol, where a border has now been placed down the Irish Sea between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom. Yeah,
something that Boris Johnson said he would never do.
Yes, and
but he signed the deal.
And that is a problem. The second is fishing, where we have not got the full repatriation of powers to determine who fishes in our waters. Those are the only 2 points. In every other respect, I have to say, I think that Lord Frost has done a brilliant job.
Well, the people that you revere don't agree with you. 22% of those in a recent poll reported by the Daily Express are satisfied with the deal we've got. 22%.
Yes, because we're dissatisfied with the fact that the European Union weaponised the border on the island of Ireland. Nobody was going to put up border controls. We weren't. Well, the European Union wasn't. The Irish government wasn't. So they weaponised the Irish border. As a result, we have a border down the Irish Sea. So goods cannot be shipped freely from Great Britain, that is England, Wales and Scotland, to Northern Ireland. That is an outrage.
Bishop Stephen Lowe, is it possible that we insisted that the border be there by leaving the European Union, and it's not the European Union being mean to us?
It's nothing to do with that. Quite clearly, the European Union wishes to protect its own free trade area, which we walked away from, to enormous economic costs, which Gerald is not prepared to acknowledge. The economic cost to this country is evident in all sorts of ways, and the notion that somehow or other we can replace the market that we are now outside with trade deals with Australia is another piece of fantasy world which the Conservative government is at present working in. But what I'm still disturbed about is the way in which Gerald and maybe the 100 or so MPs who are at present not backing Boris and making life difficult for him seem to be on the extreme right wing of the political system and want freedom at all costs, even if at the cost of people's lives and safety in relation to dealing with the virus. And the notion that they can ignore the advice of people like Chris Whitty and Sage and go their own way and damn the consequences, I find very difficult indeed. It seems to be another example of the amorality of the present government.
Let me ask you, Sir Gerald,
let me answer this point.
Okay, answer that point, then I'll ask you about the Prime Minister himself. Go ahead.
Let me answer that point. First of all, clearly the Bishop has been living on another planet, because all the doom and gloom projections that the Treasury and others put out at the time of the European referendum in 2016 have been completely unfounded. And in fact, the economy has prospered.
Well,
yes, of course, we've been hit by COVID.
That's not true. That's not true. Factually inaccurate.
Don't
but
keep
go ahead.
interrupting me. I didn't interrupt you. So the economy has actually done well. As for the idea that we are putting people's lives at risk, yes, the medics have a role to play, but ministers have to take into account more than simply the view of the medics, because there are other considerations. The damage to the economy is resulting in people losing their jobs, worrying about their loss of income, worrying about their health. This is leading to mental health problems. So the government has to weigh in all this the benefit of having further restrictions on people's activity against the damage that is doing to the economy. And look what's happening to the hospitality industry at their busiest time of year. And that is something that we need all of us to take into account. And I think the government is wrestling with those requirements. It is not straightforward. And unfortunately, I feel that they are in thrall to a small group of medics, and one of whom, of course, Professor Neil Ferguson himself, was guilty of breaching lockdown, but nothing's happened to him.
Well, nothing.
Gerald, can I come back?
Go ahead, and then I must ask both of you about the future of the Prime Minister. Go ahead, Bishop Stephen Lowe.
I do think it's very important to bear in mind that per capita, this country has performed in terms of the death rate from COVID worse than almost any other country internationally, despite our success in relation to vaccinations. The evidence is that our NHS is going to be overwhelmed in the next few weeks unless the government takes action. I actually believe that despite the incompetence of the present government, they will probably have to take some action for fear of the collapse of the National Health Service as a result of the numbers of people having to go into hospital as a result of this particular Omicron variant running riot throughout the population. And that is the advice that's being given to them by not only the medical experts, but the people involved with running the NHS. And we need to listen to them, because it's in their hands. A majority of the population who can't afford private health care actually are going to have to trust in the next few weeks and months.
Okay, now, gentlemen, I must interject at this point, because we're running out of time, and I do want your opinions on the Prime Minister. So, Sir Gerald Howarth first. The PM seems to be being blown around like a rudderless ship, and the stench of corruption that's coming off the regime is overwhelming. His time is up, surely.
Stench of corruption, and for goodness sake, Nick, I mean, get a grip of yourself. I mean, that is just a ridiculous remark to make. There is not a stench of corruption at all. Yes, the government has run into problems. I fully accept, and I quite understand that people seeing on television members of the government, or those who are in power, breaching the rules that apply to all of us, is clearly offensive, and that is probably one of the things that played a big part in the North Shropshire by-election on Thursday. But the idea that there is widespread corruption, I refute. Labour politicians were enabled. Labour supporters were enabled. One of whom was Lord Drayson.
Well, let's not do what about.
Let me finish. Who turned out to be an absolutely outstanding defence minister. And as Jack Straw once said, if the public, if the taxpayer is not going to fund political parties, they've got to be funded from somewhere.
Well, you might as well say let's rob a bank if the public aren't going to fund the political parties. So you're happy, in closing, with him remaining in position?
I think Boris Johnson has got to listen very carefully to the result of the North Shropshire by-election and the warning that has been given today by Lord Frost. He has got to spend Christmas re-examining his priorities, understand that a lot of Conservative supporters are very upset about the sort of leftward drift of his government. And I think also he's got to be very clear that the Foreign Secretary, who's extremely able and has shown herself to be very tough, I think it's asking an enormous amount of Liz Truss that she should now also be in charge of dealing with the Northern Ireland Protocol and the other outstanding EU matters. But she has got Chris Heaton-Harris alongside her, and he was chairman of the European Research Group, of which, of course, I was a member. And I am very confident that the two of them will be able to do it. But he's got to deliver on that. We cannot have the European Court of Justice anywhere near deciding what happens.
But in answer to my point, it's not an undiluted yes, but it's a more or less a thumbs up for him to continue carrying on. But he has to think about his direction of travel. Finally, same question to you, Bishop Stephen Lowe. Are you happy with Boris Johnson continuing in his position?
Well, I would be if I were Keir Starmer, because I think the polls will continue to move in the direction of the Labour Party and even the Lib Dems while Boris continues to be in office. I think he's lost the trust of the British people. He has shown himself to be completely untrustworthy. He showed himself actually, as you said, Nick, to have the stench of corruption around him in all sorts of ways. And frankly, I think the government has become, as I said before, totally amoral. And a government that's amoral doesn't deserve to be in office.
Well, I must admit, I totally agree with the last comment. He does seem to have lost all trust with the public, hasn't he? But after the interview, the amount of people who rung up to give that Sir Gerald Howarth absolute belters. It was funny. I love the way he lost his rag when they started calling out his utter drivel, saying, that's not true, that's not true. And he replied, don't interrupt me, don't interrupt me. Don't interrupt my utter given nonsense. I didn't interrupt you when you were giving truth bombs and evidence-based conversation, so at least do me the courtesy to allow me to talk utter tripe. Oh, I just wet myself laughing. I shall leave the video here because it's gone on long enough, hasn't it? But told you we're in for a treat. So, until the next time, I shall bid you farewell. So, take care.